Terry Hoffeld. I'm a retired USPHS dental officer and I'm co-vice chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee of the COA. First of all, apologies for the delay in getting started. Zoom doesn't live up to its name of Zoom. It can sometimes have a glitch, and we experienced one, but hope that you'll all be patient, and we're cutting short everything outside of working with Admiral Giroir. Um, I wanted to just clear the chat. Okay. The process that we're going to have is Dr. Giroir will be giving a presentation, and then following that, he will be answering some questions. We have some already accumulated. If you put into the chat questions that you might have, those can also be added to the list of questions to be considered. Historically, what happened is that 4 months ago, a think tank, the Cato Institute, put together a report that was definitely insulting to all of us who served in the Corps. It was entitled Unnecessary Relics, the Surgeon General and Public Health Service Commission Corps. It had lots of bad data in it and lots of bad conclusions. The next day, Admiral Giroir was able to respond in LinkedIn, and then 2 days later, that was republished in the clinical journal Onco Daily. And I hope that since you were given those links before coming in, that you had a chance to look at them. Again, if you have questions that you would like to have answered in regard to the topic, please put them in the chat, and they will be considered after his presentation. And let me introduce a couple of members of the Veterans Affairs Committee. Elise Young is here. She's not only a member of our committee, but she's also a member of the Legislative Affairs Committee. Holly Williams is the other vice chair of the committee, along with me. Elise and Holly will be reading the questions that come in and going through those to make sure that they don't overlap and cause too much confusion. Chair of our committee is Margot Riggs, and I think she would like to have a few words about what our committee does. Margot?
Yes, thank you very much, Terry. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are very grateful to have Admiral Giroir join us for our quarterly Veterans Affairs Committee virtual gathering. So we try to do this quarterly throughout the year. I'd like to make a plug, please. If you're not already a member or your membership has lapsed, please join again, membership with COA. They are our best advocate for U.S. Public Health Service Commission Corps officer issues, not only with Commission Corps headquarters, but up on the Hill and advocating across the country in our states as well. So I'm the chair of our Veterans Affairs Committee on the COA board. And our committee is here to serve our veterans, so retired and those who have left service after being in the Commission Corps. And that's our focus. We try to encourage you to belong with COA, to join with us, and to share information that we have available about changes to our benefits or things that might impact us as veterans. And today we are grateful to have others joining us, active duty, reserve, to our Veterans Affairs Committee sponsored meeting. So thank you, Terry, for letting me say a few words, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Margot. I could do a very extended introduction for Admiral Giroir, but I think since you started late, I'd like to get as close to him as possible. But needless to say, he is a physician. He was trained at University of Texas Southwestern, where he stayed in Dallas for his residencies in pediatrics and began his career in research in infectious diseases. He then went to work for DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Program Agency, and worked there for about 9 years. then was appointed as Chancellor of the Texas A&M University System, where he was also Professor of Medicine, of Engineering, and of Government and Public Service. Um, and
That's a long enough
finally,
introduction, really. My
well, let
mother's
me,
not watching, but go ahead.
Well, I was just about to go into the one relevant to us. In 2018, he was appointed Assistant Secretary for Health and commissioned as a full four-star admiral in the U.S. Public Health Service. He's been the kind of admiral that we would love to have, that he's been involved. He deployed to several hotspots during the years that he was in service. And with that, I'll turn it right over to you, Admiral Joie.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I do have a habit of breaking Zoom or Teams, so Jackie, don't feel it's your fault. It usually follows me around. Um, as always, I'm honored to participate in anything that has to do with the Corps, and Jackie knows that anytime she needs me, she can call me. And I really wanted this to be more of a conversation where I could make a few comments and then really entertain your questions. And I know the catalyst here is my response to the Cato Institute piece. But let me start with a little background. I was sworn in on February 15th, 2021. And on February 16th, 2021, 2018, how the years go by, 2018. And on February 16th, 2018, I was in the Secretary's office discussing what was an agreed to memo by Commission Corps headquarters that because OMB suggested decreasing the Corps, they were going to voluntarily decrease the Corps from about 6,200 at that time to 4,000. And apparently this was a compromise between 6,000 and 0. They voluntarily agreed to do that. Well, having spent my life admiring the Commission Corps and finally having an opportunity to lead it, the last thing I was going to do was preside over the dismantling of the Corps, particularly to people who didn't understand what the mission was, who didn't understand that you fit the force structure to your mission and objectives, but just thought it was a good idea to cut the Corps for some reasons that were not data driven. So as we sort of crystallize a little bit later, and we talked about this during COVID all the time, but in retrospect, I always like to divide things in two: is do we have a PR problem or do we have a facts problem? And at that time, I thought we had a PR problem, but we definitely had a facts problem. And the facts were, we didn't have good justification to understand whether the Corps was really more expensive than civilians or whether they weren't. We didn't have data understanding what the agencies wanted. Did they want more Corps, less Corps, same amount of Corps? Did we have data that could understand whether you could substitute civilian employees for Corps members, looking at it in a fact basis? We decided we needed to answer these questions, and we needed to answer questions about what the core mission of the Corps was and what would be the force structure to do it. So we took the reins from OMB, and I basically said, hell no, we're not doing that. And the Surgeon General was right next to me saying the same thing. And of course, we fortunately had Alex Azar as secretary, who reminded me and everyone that the first people who welcomed his great-grandparents into America were uniformed Corps officers at Ellis Island. So he was a very, very strong supporter of the Corps. So we basically decided to take our own destiny in our own hands. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with this sort of 1.5-year study, which was, it was not cheap. It was done through Booz Allen. We did it in the correct way, and we came up with some important conclusions. Is that number one is the Corps was indispensable, and the agencies wanted more Corps members than less Corps members. Number two, for the great majority of disciplines, the Corps is not only providing much more quality, but at a greatly reduced cost when you take everything in. So it was not only higher quality, but it was much more efficient in cost savings. It did things that no one else can do. But we also did admit that we were not going to be a staffing agency for op divisions and HHS who couldn't get their act together to recruit or didn't use their authorities and could hire civilians where you did not need a commissioned corps officer. So we really ranked those in terms of what we needed to do, how we needed to do it, what things we might be able to substitute. We immediately came that the Corps should not shrink to 4,000, but needed to be expanded to 7,500, and we needed a reserve corps for all the missions we did. And we marched down that pathway. And that's sort of where we left that, but moving forward with a great deal of legislative opportunities that we seized during COVID to get funding. One of the last things I did is we didn't have a doctrine in the Corps. You know, who was the Corps? What do we believe? What do we do? And together under the with the Assistant Surgeon Generals and particularly Rear Admiral Giberson, we put that doctrine together, and I still think it's a really good document that defines who we are as a group. We also did things to recognize that you know, you can't just wear the uniform, you have to live the uniform. And I emphasized to everyone that you may work at the CDC. The CDC is where you work. The Commissioned Corps is who you are. And that needed to be the same throughout every agency and everyone else. And your primary loyalty, who you were, your persona, was a Corps member. And I can tell you that Surgeon General Jerome Adams and I absolutely tried to live that to the fullest extent. It was the honor of our lives, putting on uniforms and serving our country along with our brothers and sisters in uniform, and contributing to the Corps in some small way and helping it to thrive. And I think a lot of that has been maybe, I was shocked to see the numbers in the Corps and the numbers of retirement. And, you know, I've been hearing a lot about the morale issues and the practical issues. So when the Cato Institute came out, the Cato Institute, I saw a question. It's a legitimate institute. It is a policy institute that people listen to. It's quite libertarian in its overall outlook. But, you know, libertarians kind of meet somewhere along the circle with conservative Republicans and with Democrats. So they are looked at. And I have tried to stay under the radar for a lot of things, but I have come out strongly on a few issues, and including HIV. The Ending HIV Epidemic was a program that I pitched to the Secretary and to the President that we had funded and announced at the State of the Union. I also feel pretty strongly about measles and overall pandemic preparation with mRNA vaccines. But the one that, you know, really got me was the Cato Institute, because it was the same unsupported vomitus put on a page that I heard from OMB the years beforehand, and it was just factually incorrect. And not being in uniform and not being a government servant anymore officially, I had a little more opportunity to be liberal with my prose and say exactly what I felt about the analysis and the lack of analysis, and the author's view on that, which I never received a response from. And it really outlined the points that I had. And I liked ending it with, you know, the next time you have a pandemic or have a wildfire or in an opioid epidemic, you're not going to call the Cato Institute policy wonk. You're going to call a uniformed health professional who spends their lives doing nothing more than serving the American people, who are exquisitely trained and duty bound. And so I felt very compelled to write that. I wrote it. It got an enormous amounts of readership from policymakers. I got calls, as I had beforehand, but I got calls from many places, including CBO, many Senate and House staffers, some of whom I knew from previous times and some of whom I didn't. But I really felt compelled to do that. And I think moving forward, you know, there are just a few things I want to comment on. And again, I wanted this to be a conversation. I didn't want to make a formal presentation. Is number one, we have strong data, right? We have the data. Commissioned Corps Headquarters has the data. We had a plan to support it. And just because they believe data from 20 years ago, that's flawed. It is our responsibility to know the data so we don't have a facts problem, and then work on the PR side of it, right? And that's getting the message out everywhere we can, from the invisible Corps to what Jackie does on the Hill, because in uniform, you're You're limited to what you can do on the Hill. And most importantly, getting the current ash on the side of the Corps, completely making sure that he understands and that can get to the Secretary for support. I can say I've had many conversations with Dr. Christine, and I can tell you that he is committed to supporting the Corps. He comes from a military family, has always honored that service, and he wants to do everything he can. And he's working out he's staying at Fort Leonard because his brother is a very senior officer in the Army, and he's working out every day in his public health service workout gear, spreading the message. And I don't think I'm letting too much of a cat out of the bag, but when he pins on in December, he asked me to be master of ceremony, and I'm certainly very honored to do that and to show some continuity. We're all going to make some mistakes, and I'm sure he will too, but I feel in my gut that his heart is in the right place, and he wants to do everything to support the Corps and work with the Commissioned Officers Association. So I mean, that's all I really wanted, to introduce, that this is not a new fight. This is an old fight that started my second day in office, and we've been battling since then. But we have the data. As some of my friends say, who play poker, you got the cards. I don't play poker, and I won't have a poker face. You know exactly what's in my hand. That's just the way I am. But we've got the cards. We have the data, and need to make sure that what I believe is going to be a very committed Ash and a secretary who should understand that the Corps can do more for his MAHA agenda of nutrition, environmental stewardship, toxin work, opioid work, substance use reform. There's some things that we don't see eye to eye on, obviously, but there's an enormous amount that we do see eye to eye on that the Commission Corps could be his biggest strength moving forward to achieve some of those objectives. Because if you need a discipline, we got it, and we could bring the game to any of those priorities. And Dr. Christine is going to emphasize that for sure to the Secretary, and we move forward together. So I'll just stop here if that's okay. And I really wanted to prefer to take questions and really interact with the group. And I'm very honored so many of you are on the line. I can't see you because I only have 6 squares on top, not 250, but I think Jackie or Elise will be triaging the questions.
Thank you, Dr. Giroir. Particularly appreciate your perspective, and it's up to 300 people now at this point. So let's continue the conversation. Holly Williams and Elise Young will be providing questions for you that have been submitted, and they'll also be going through the chat to select any additional ones. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, sir, for your really thoughtful remarks. As Terry mentioned, these are questions that were submitted previously, both from retired officers as well as active duty. And if time permits, we'll look at the chat. The first question is interesting because it was similarly posed by Admiral Solomon and Ensign Wang.
Fantastic.
So, sir, during your time in office, you suggested that increasing the core strength to 10,000 could benefit our nation's public health. However, core strength is now down to nearly 5,200 officers. Few people are aware of PHS as a career path. Some stumble into it through junior or senior co-step as a way of funding their education. Do you have any suggestions on how to better make our case for restoring our baseline strength to 6,500 and even aiming to reach 10,000 officers?
So it really is the core question, and I have not been involved over the last 3 years to any serious degree, but it's got to be data driven. And the first thing, and this is clear in the report that we did, and I encourage that to be shared to whatever degree, is the biggest argument is ask the agencies where we work, and uniformly across the board, And let me tell you, you think CDC is the strongest? It's strong, but FDA, CMS, some of the strongest advocates for core officers doing things that they could never do. So the first thing is, I would say, engage again the agencies with whom we work. And when I say engage, I think this is the ASH. I think this is the future Surgeon General. I think it is Jackie. And revisit the data we have, but have them engaged to what they really need, because core officers provide the leadership, they provide the expertise, and to some degree, they're the Swiss Army knife, right? You take an officer and they could do anything. And that's not the way it is on the civilian side. As painful it is, in shutdowns, you work because you're in uniform and you have to do it. So number one is ask your customer what they need, and uniformly, everyone wants more core officers. Secondly, let me see. Katie Burbich, my former, she's writing something in the chat that I can't really read, but maybe she could make the point. Secondly, people forget about the pandemic, right? They forget about the pandemic, but what we did and what we needed to do. And I would say that, core officers, look, on day one, actually at day -2, I get a call for core officers to go support the evacuations from the Diamond Princess and to man all the quarantine stations at military bases. So that started, day -2. Who is going to work at the airport screening people? Sure, it's the CDC, but what did the CDC? They wanted deployed core officers. When the nursing home was getting devastated in one of the front lines in Washington State, the staff was completely decimated. They were decimated physically and they were decimated emotionally because they were seeing all the people they loved and cared for, dying or getting whisked to the hospital. What happened? We deployed 50 core officers there to provide relief. I write in my book, after the Diamond Princess, we were supposed to all come back, but we had 50 Americans stuck in Japan, and we sort of bent the rules. Actually, we avoided the rules and left a team there because we're not going to leave Americans behind in a foreign country at the beginning of an epidemic. When we needed to do testing was completely a mess due to bureaucrats and regulation and other things, and we were called in to fix it. I was named testing czar on March 12th. We had a whole bunch of FEMA people and core officers in my office for 3 days, and within 3 days, we set up the national testing program, which was out in 41 sites within a week, drive-through sites from a 0 flat start. So, remembering what the Corps did, and I'm not hawking my book, it's really cheap on Amazon now. Like it gets really cheap and gets expensive, then it gets really cheap, or I can send you a PDF, but it sort of outlines all the things that happen. So, really making the case for the Corps, but I think starting with the constituents of the people who value the Corps and know how much it's worth. And then, of course, making sure the one thing that we had that very few people had is we had the Surgeon General, myself, the COA, the Secretary, the Deputy Secretary, and to a large degree, the President, all aligned. The President knows who the Corps is, right? He knows me. He knows who the Corps is. He knows we were there. He knows we saved the country's bacon multiple times, not just during the pandemic. So you bring that alignment together, and that's the start. And of course, the biggest selling point for the Corps are the individual officers. And it's not always the admirals or the captains. It's the ensigns and lieutenants who can get out and relate to people. And you need a recruiting plan. We had the base of recruiting plan, but you need it. Need to go to campuses. Need to wear your uniform proudly. When I came in the office, there were a lot of proud wearing uniforms, and there were a lot of people who couldn't pass Cub Scout inspection. We tightened that up pretty much, because if you're going to wear the uniform, you need to have pride in the uniform. You need to wear it. We don't expect everybody here to be in Delta Force. That's not what it's about. But you can wear your uniform well. You could be groomed. You could uphold the military tradition. So all those things. Probably too long of an answer, but it's not a simple answer, but it's all things together. And I think things are coming together right now, and we could see, particularly with Dr. Christine's support, which I sense is going to be very strong, a resurgence.
Sir, thank you for your answer, and I think you answered a little bit of what the next question, but certainly this question comes from Captain Harrell, and she asks, given the current absence of a confirmed Surgeon General and the evolving landscape of federal public health leadership, what guidance would you offer PHS officers on strengthening visibility, demonstrating ongoing value, and positioning ourselves as indispensable assets to the nation's public health mission?
So it's it's a great question, and I don't know the impact of not having a Surgeon General right now. I mean, we didn't get confirmed. I mean, Jerome got confirmed in September, October, so of 2017. I didn't get confirmed in February because of all the political tricks that go on. So I know it impacts everyone, but you've got a strong Commission Corps headquarters. I think you've got strong people in the Surgeon General's office, and you have an Ash who'll be pinning on in mid-December. So I think you run with your strengths. I think everybody has to always look for an opportunity to create value for the Corps. Okay. And this starts at the ensign, all the way up. What can we do? And I put this into two categories. Number one is, what can we do that aligns with the priorities of the administration? Okay. There are going to be some things that I think most people, and I don't mean to speak for you, but particularly in vaccine policy and vaccine approach, I don't agree with the secretary. Okay. And I've been public about that. But there are a huge amount of things that I do agree with. So find the areas where there is agreement, right? Where there is agreement, and find a way how the Corps can contribute to that. And there are enormously many. And I would use the deployment capability and the regional health offices to be kind of, the spokes that come out of the main office to do that. And let me just, so align with the priorities to the degree you can. And I think there really are many. I think there really are many that can be aligned. On the global stage, there's going to be, I think, new sort of public health announcements. You saw the global health strategy from the administration that really works strongly on bilateral basis. So instead of trying to work through the WHO, they're working country to country to try to build not just sort of an emergency response, but integrate it into a sustainable health system. And I think that's a really good opportunity because, you work in the Indian Health Service, you work in the Bureau of Prisons, you work in primary care. So how can we bring sort of an all of care approach on a country by country basis? So it's not just, I want to fix HIV, but how do I put HIV and tuberculosis and pandemic preparedness into the context of a real health system that helps bring up the country? That's a big, grand challenge that I think you could put together the assistant surgeon generals and work. And this is Department of State. Okay, this is going to be under state where this actually gets done. The next thing I would say is think of things on the edges, and we really tried prospectively to do that. So we kind of think of ourselves as bimodal, right? So, there's a wildfire or a tsunami we deploy, or we're back to our sort of normal state of position, right? We're back at our agencies, do what we do. Is there some intermediate ground between then that it's not an all-out emergency, but it's near that? And one of the things we approached was, for example, I'm just giving you an example, the opioid takedowns, and this was really successful, and we didn't even have to do very much to make it successful. But when the DEA was raiding pill mills in the South, they couldn't give advance notice because the pill mills would all be, dissipated. So they go raid them. But what does that leave? That leaves 1,000 people who have opioid use disorder, without inappropriate prescription of opioids, but that sends them to the streets for heroin and fentanyl. So how do you solve that gap? Well, we were able to solve that gap because the DEA could confide in us having security clearances and having the uniform to understand where they were going to go and to work with the locals to make contingency plans on how to take care of people and to put them into care instead of on the streets with fentanyl. Okay, that's not quite like deploying to Ebola, and it's not like being at your agency, but it fills this intermediate gap where only the Corps could really fill it. Another strange opportunity, and I bring this up in the book too. There was sort of a disastrous policy that I think was not the president's, but was another policy of separating children at the border from their parents. And there needed to be a complete review of like 30,000 children who were separated. And I heard in the secretary's meeting that, it was going to take 6 months to review and figure out how to put them together. Well, I said, we're going to deploy the Corps to do that. And it's not a glamorous mission, but they were in a couple of rooms for, 3 weeks. And instead of 6 months working to reunite children, that was all done in 3 weeks. And that may not be a pandemic, but I'm very proud of that work. And I think the Corps should be. So I think looking for those kind of opportunities that are non-traditional, the Corps has to continue to evolve, okay? Has to continue to evolve to do things in a different way and to look for new missions. We're not screening people. We're not quarantining boats. We don't have our boat anymore, right? But there's a lot of things we can do to advance our mission into the new century. You can wind me up. I love my time, and I'm not saying we live in the past. I'm just trying to give a few examples of trying to think out of the box on how we could advance the mission of Corps and what we did. And there's 1,000 more of those opportunities. I would say another one. Let me just bring this up. We had a complete plan to start ending homelessness in Los Angeles. And this is very timely because the president absolutely is committed to homelessness. And we put together a plan, and that's there somewhere, where there would be, on the backside, there would be government housing. So we could take people, and the president was going to take all these federal buildings that were not being used. So you'd have to go through Los Angeles work permits, and it takes you 20 years to do it, and to create housing. But the Corps would deploy. I'm getting feedback here. I don't know, it could be from 300 of you. But the Corps would deploy, and it would be a major deployment of probably 300 individuals that would work on intaking people. And this would be using National Guard facilities and infrastructure, but intaking people off the street, screening them for HIV, screening them for mental illness, during our service access teams, because there are a lot of veterans, there are a lot of people who could qualify for support, working with them, integrating them into the FQCs, and being sort of that intermediate to get them off the street and provide the health and mental services before they can get into stable housing from the federal government. I know President Trump is really committed to this, and this is a really big idea. And who can do this? Only the Corps could bring the kind of, I'm seeing a lot of frightened looks on your faces, but that is a big mission to help end homelessness. But there's got to be a transition from where they are in the state of mental and physical disarray, maybe with HIV that could get treatment on the spot, with HCV that can get treatment on the spot, and then moving them into stable housing. Think about that. What a great mission for the Corps. I'm still very excited about that, and I volunteer. If you do that, I'll be right there with you.
Thank you, sir. Those are great examples. Our next question comes from Admiral DeMarco. What is the importance of the Corps to U.S. national security, and why is it indispensable?
Well, thanks for the softball. I really appreciate it. He is a good buddy of mine, and we've been through a lot together. Public health is national security, period, full stop. Let's start with the things that are not so, glamorous, but public health is the driver of healthcare expenditures and of economic expenditures. And our country is going to go broke unless we have public health leadership to improve the health of our country. The second thing is all the things we talked about. Us keeping Ebola in Africa was pretty important because I ran the Ebola response in Texas, and that one patient and the two nurses almost brought down the entire Southwest. So if you don't think that's important, have another thought. And obviously what happened in the pandemic, I think the pandemic, there were a few good policy decisions, but the core was really the tip of the spear, no matter where you go. And there will be more pandemics. There will be more need for the core, testing, immunizations, serving our poorest people, saving those in need. So I think you all know that, but I also, there's limits to what I can say about this, but there was very significant planning when I was there about the unfortunate possibility of a kinetic war where our armed forces would have very significant casualties because of the adversaries that we'd be against. It was made pretty clear to me, and this was 20 meetings in high security, that the military was going to have to take care of the military casualties, and the public health service were going to need to be there to take care of all the civilians. And there might have been 10, 20, 100,000 of them, including chemical casualties. So without getting into specifics, we still have that mission. If our military is in a kinetic conflict with any of the people you think, their healthcare professionals are going to be taking care of their casualties. And who's going to take care of the civilians, the expats? It's going to be us. So maybe that's an answer you didn't expect, but that's a very real part of our mission. And I have emphasized that to Dr. Christine, who I think has already been to the Pentagon twice, talking with the Surgeon Generals of the armed forces about how we integrate better and the importance of our mission. And feel free if anybody wants to comment. You don't have to just ask me questions. I'm not the bearer of all knowledge, but I'm happy to answer what I can.
No, this has been terrific. So, Admiral, this question comes from Captain Williams, and it's a little shift here, but I'm excited to hear about all this work. As veterans, and there are a number of us are on the call, are no longer under the Hatch Act, what is the best way to make our concerns known to Congress? For example, signing email petitions, calling congressional offices, making appointments with staffers, or maybe even attending protests.
Yeah, so I think everybody has the view on this. And remember, you are governed by the Hatch Act when you're in uniform, but you can still engage in political activity so long as you don't represent the uniform or anything in your government service. I'm going to say my view on this changed a little bit. So obviously, if you have connections in high places, that's really important. But I think I really think in maybe, I'm sorry, the new hire that you have, what was her name again? Who came from the representative's office?
Jasmine.
Jasmine. Okay, I have learned that the Hill is run by 24-year-old women with IQs of 160 and a drive that is unbelievable. I think talking to relatively significant legislative assistants, legislative directors, you don't always have to talk to the congressperson. The legislative assistants, they write a lot of the legislation. They know who's the phone calls to take. So I'm not a big fan of protests because they get very disarrayed and not on focus. I'm much more in favor of briefing congressional staff, and you don't have to have the congressperson there all the time. Set it up that way. Have a very specific issue that you want action on. Don't make it easy, right? Don't give them an easy win. Ask for something that's really substantive. Like, it's very easy to authorize money, but that doesn't mean it's going to get appropriated. Don't just ask for an authorization. You need to ask for an appropriation. You need to know who to get to. And I know Katie Burbidge, my former aide, went and has been to multiple military schools, but she's been working in Senator Murkowski's office. And I think there's a couple others who are in that program. So I would leverage their experience of how to work with the Hill. That's why we put them there. So there'd be a person that's always in the ear of a senator or a representative about the core, but also that they could gain the experience about what makes a difference and what you need to do and who do you need to do it with and who's the important staffer on this committee and not, and vice versa. So I'm a big fan of working through Congress. And then the final thing, and it goes without saying, is the Commissioned Officers Association has a lot more degrees of freedom than you do as an officer, right? So it was very important to me, and we set this up, and the assistant surgeon generals know it, is that when we had a major change in the Corps or a major initiative, the first things we would do is talk to the assistant surgeon generals and the chief officers of their disciplines, and we'd make sure that everybody is aligned and got the input. Then we would announce it to the Corps. So we'd have a general Corps meeting with everybody being announced. And then immediately after that, and I mean after I left the room where we're having the general meeting with all the officers, I would meet with Jackie, or I would meet with her predecessor, so that the Commissioned Officers Association didn't have rumors, didn't hear it hearsay. They knew exactly what we were doing, why we were doing it. But it was also important to me that the active duty officers heard it before the Commissioned Officers Association, and the assistant surgeon generals and the chief officers heard it before the general Corps. So I think I would encourage, and I did encourage Dr. Christine to keep up that tempo, so the Commissioned Officers Association could use all the tools in their toolbox with Congress to do things that we can't do. So that's my answer, is to work through the legislative assistants, especially the 24-year-old women who I think run Washington.
Hey, thank you. This question comes from Captain Weinberg. It was noted in your article in the September 25 COA Frontline publication that it was asserted that the Commission Corps is too expensive. What specific areas should the Corps and the Surgeon General focus on now to ensure that the Corps has a strong and indelible future?
So, it wasn't, you have to keep refreshing this, but please go back to the study we did. And it detailed in high detail what was the economic value, independent of all the other value, the economic value of people in the Corps compared to civilians when you bring all things together. And for almost every discipline, the Corps was a value. And it was really an incredible value when you talk about physicians, dentists, nurse practitioners, people like that, where the cost on the private sector would be 3, 4, 5 times as much, and there's no continuity of care. Would you like a contractor coming in at 5 times the cost that switch out every 6 weeks, or do you want a dedicated person in the Indian Health Service who you're going to see for the next 3 years, if not 20 years? So go back to that, because it was a clear proposition. And then even though the ones that may have been, economically a wash or maybe a little more expensive, they do things that civilians can never do, like deploy, right? If CMS needs to deploy someone, who are they deploying? They're generally deploying Corps officers, or if you have to work during a shutdown, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, much less the national security value. So I would go back to the data, and I would encourage refreshing it. Now, the ASH controls all the budget, right? Because the Surgeon General really has no money. So I was able to squeeze, things, because we put probably $3 or $4 million into the study and into the Corps website. That website, it was a disaster before that. It probably needs to be refreshed. But all those kind of things are kind of important. So, get the ASH to start squeezing the little bits of the nickels off of the HHS budget to maybe refresh that study if it needs to be refreshed, or just bring it forward. And I'm happy, Jackie, I didn't bring piles of files with me because that's not appropriate to do when you leave office. But I am happy if you need interpretation or just history about that to work with you guys, so at least you know what we're thinking and how we pitched it.
Elise, I believe you've got the next question.
Mouse kind of went in a different direction. But so next question, and this one comes from Lieutenant Commander Worsley. And thank you for your service to the Public Health Service. What is your advice for navigating the current environment as an officer when it seems that some policies could appear as anti-public health?
Yeah, it's very difficult, and I don't envy you in your position, right? I would it's a really hard answer. The first thing I would do is, try to find the common ground where you can, and I think there are a large number of issues that that there will be common ground on. Secondly, you have to, I would never say violate, your own personal ethic, that you would do something that violates your professional code of conduct. Can't do that, your personal code of conduct. But sometimes the best you can do is the best you can do. And if you could take 100% crappy policy and make it only 90% crappy, I think that's worthwhile doing, right? And this is where I had some challenges with some of the public health, individuals. The hardest battle of my life politically was when I was acting FDA commissioner, getting the president to agree to allow me to regulate kid-friendly e-cigarette flavors. Okay. Now, I couldn't get everything that I wanted. In menthol, we know that was an issue. I think there's some arguments, but I got the ability from the president to regulate kid-friendly flavors in at least limited pieces with the disposable cartridges and all the kid-friendly flavors. And, I got crucified. I mean, crucified by the American Heart Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, because I didn't get everything. Well, I tried to let them know that sometimes you can't get everything. You're not the president. You're not the secretary. Particularly you. I mean, I was political, right? I was the assistant secretary. I had a lot more juice to argue and to get in front of the vice president or president. But, if you're a lieutenant commander, you don't. But I would say, as long as it's not violating your professional, you can't violate your professional ethics. You can't lie, cheat, or steal. You can't disclose, government secrets. You can't do any of those things. But I do think it's appropriate that if you could take a crappy policy and make it 10% better, you should try to do that. And I think there are opportunities to do that. It's not an easy answer. I struggle with it. Probably the reason I'm not in the administration right now is I couldn't square some of the things they were going to ask me to do at a senior level with what I knew was right. But that's at a very senior level. So I think it's an individual decision based on it. And, talk to your mentors, right? Talk to your chiefs of your discipline, talk to your assistant surgeon generals, find a mentor, right? I think it's really important to find a mentor in the Corps or sometimes out of the Corps that, has some bruises and bumps and who's been through things to talk through this, because I think sometimes just the act of talking through it with someone you trust is really important and can help your decision making. I don't have a silver bullet for that. It's a really tough question, but I would urge you to not accept black or white, that there are shades of gray that are worth fighting for. And if you don't fight for it, nobody is going to. And that little bit of gray could open up a whole door of light within 6 months or 12 months, right? So that's my advice. It's very practical and transactional, but I think you got to keep, sometimes you make grand slams and sometimes you need to make bunt singles. And, sometimes you got to take a bunt single.
Thank you, sir. And the notion of mentoring is one of the things that we hold dear in the Veterans Committee, that we are here to help our younger officers who are active duty. So I'm going to skip around a bit with our questions because you've previously answered them. And this one is a bit sensitive, an anonymous question. In this era of political uncertainty, with the federal officers that serve as ethical watchdogs being shuttered, what is the best way to raise ethical concerns about actions done by the administration that might affect PHS?
Yeah, so I think I previewed this question. I would be careful to make sure you're parsing it right. Is it a policy question or is it an ethical question? Okay, there could be policies that you don't agree with that are disasters, but they're policy issues. They have underlying ethical principles, but they're not like an ethical issue per se. So I would make sure you're parsing it, in the right way. It kind of depends what it is and who you are. The first thing I would advise, though, is I think your you are obligated to try to go through your channels, right? There's nothing worse than not going through your channels and your chain of command, and you're fortunate in the Corps because you have two. You have the chain of command for your agency, and you have your chain of command in the Corps. And even if one doesn't hear you, I am really hopeful that the Corps hears you. So number one, parse the issue. Number two, go through your chain of command. And I think no matter, there are still, I think, safe places to go in almost every place, that if you've exhausted that and you really have exhausted that, you could go, to the Inspector General's office in your agency, right? I would not skip to Congress unless it were the most dire, horrible, life-threatening, because I think you need to keep it within your executive branch to the degree you can. Crossing branches is really a dire step, and I would say that's something that should be done at a senior officer level, not at a junior officer level. Should be done by someone with a star or 2 stars or 3 or a 4 to cross that. Number one, it's our duty as senior office. There could be flack for that, and our duty as senior officers to protect the junior officers, and to mentor them, but also to protect them. We have to have their back, and if there's going to be flack, it should be taken by the senior, flag officers, not the junior officers. So that's my advice. Chain of command on both sides of the chain. Go to the Inspector General's office. Don't cross branches unless it's dire. And if you have to do something dire, have your senior officers do it.
Very good. I'm going to take a question from the chat. I know we're
Great.
kind of short on time, but hello, I'm at NIH, and during the shutdown, a few officers talked to our institute director about hiring more Corps officers as we were exempt or accepted from furloughs. The director's concern was that we move from agency to agency, and it's hard to keep us at our stations for a long time. What do you recommend I tell the director that would help them inform why it's a great idea to have PHS officers? And this is from Commander Jorge Munoz Ortez.
So it's a really great question. And this is something, a fact I just don't know about, okay? Is that I think it is the Corps policy, and people from CCHQ need to come in, is that we support long-term commitments to an agency with a couple of caveats. Number one, we would want to make sure that if the opportunity is there for a junior officer to have exposure to a number of places before they commit to 15 or 20 years. And at least it was our feeling that we definitely didn't want a person being a flag officer and maybe not an 06 with having been, only at the CDC for 30 years or 25 years. We thought it was very important that if you're going to be in a leadership role in the Corps, that you got a big view of the elephant, if you know my analogy, and got to see all parts of it, because your responsibility is to the Corps first. The NIH is where you work. The Corps is who you are. But you're going to have to correct me on if the policies change. But I think we still support long-term commitment with an agency, as long as the junior officers have a chance to look around. And before you become a flag officer, I think it should be a requirement that you have to move from your agency and look. Being at the NIH is not the same as being in the Indian Health Service. Being at the FDA is not the same thing as deploying with the CDC. So we thought it was very important for that. But I do support long-term commitments to agencies, and I think if that's at a director level of an institute, that needs to be heard from the ASH or the Surgeon General directly to that person to reinforce that.
Thank you, sir. And I believe this is time-wise our last question for you.
Okay.
In the time of rapid policy shifts and emerging public health threats, what competencies or capabilities do you believe officers should prioritize to remain mission ready and strategically impactful?
Um, it is such a good question. So, I think, and this is something, I learned, right? I learned when I started really working with the Corps is, you have a specialty, but that is your specialty, but you could do so much more, right? Um, um, a pharmacist could lead a deployment, quarantining people for the pandemic, right? So I think, um, I think the most important thing is you have to be great at what you do. Pharmacist, nurse, physician, EHO, engineer. You have to be great at that. But it's very important to have the leadership capabilities and the overall flexibility and knowledge so that you could function in a variety of situations. And what does that mean? That means deploying. That means, we gave deployment credit to RAM, remote area medical, because I thought it was a great opportunity for different disciplines to come together and start understanding what they do in a real kind of environment. And then we started putting injects into there, like you'd be doing this, but all of a sudden, okay, everybody's around the table for an hour and a half. There was just a nuclear, a radiation attack on Washington, D.C. What are you going to do? Right. So I think there's some practical things and tabletop things, but the most important thing is don't get buried into a little niche. If you're at the NIH, don't be working on, the 5' UTR of this E. coli only. You've got to maintain your officership and your broader view. And that's education. That's going to COA conferences. That's deploying. I think deployment is, I thought it was the most fabulous opportunity to deploy and to work with officers and to meet people, one-on-one. The Surgeon General and I both made the commitment to get the field medical readiness badge. I forget what it was, but we took all the courses, right? And a lot of them were really dated, and it really made me upset because they were 20 years and out of date. So it was good for us to do it and to pass it because it's what leaders do. If you want to be a part of the Corps, you got to be part of the Corps. Got to do the physical fitness test. Got to do pretty good on things. He ran really well, and I did planks really well. So that saved us, from some of the other things. But I think all those things to maintain your flexibility as a leader in a number of situations, and deployments put you in those situations. Captain Herb Alvarez, one of my besties from the past. I just saw her on the screen. My best to her. What an unbelievable officer and patriot she is. We are so honored and proud to have her as part of the Corps. That's all I got. I mean, if we're out of time, first of all, I hope it was worthwhile for you guys to hear, a has-been talk about some of the things and some of the future. But I am completely committed to the Corps, and will do everything I can to support the Corps in general or individual officers to the degree I can. And certainly I intend, because I was invited to work with Dr. Christine, and at least giving some institutional knowledge and history that he can build on and do the things right that we did and fix all the things we screwed up to move forward for the betterment of the Corps.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Vice Admiral Giroir. You used the analogy at the beginning that the questions wound you up. I was similarly wound up by all your responses to those questions throughout the hour. Thank you so much. And with that, I'll pass it on to our Executive Director of the COA, Jack Rignovsky. Jack?
Thank you, Terry. And sir, thank you so much for spending so much time with us today and your flexibility. You just referred to yourself as a has-been, I think, or something similar, and that is not ever a word or a phrase I've ever heard about you, and I don't think it will ever be muttered about you. During this call, I reflected on not just the last time we hosted a webinar with you, which you and I chatted about earlier, which was in January of 2021, when you were leaving office and your goodbye message to the officers. But you've really had this relationship with COA, I think, almost 8 years. And it has meant so much to us and to the officers, your engagement. I've never had you not respond to an inquiry that we needed from you in probably more than 10 minutes. And I will just share a little tidbit that sometimes that's even late at night between the two of us, right? And I only share that, and I think it's very important for you all to know Admiral Giroir's continued passion and commitment for the Corps. And that is, sir, your legacy, and it hasn't gone away when you left the office. So this has been an incredible experience. I will tell you, not only did we have our glitch at the beginning, so thank everyone for your patience, but we reached maximum capacity for this meeting. And so we had people that couldn't even sign on, and that's a good problem to have. We're sorry about that. Luckily, we've recorded it. So this is going to go out afterwards on a cloud link so that many others can experience and learn from the knowledge and wisdom that you share today. I always learn things when I hear you speak. So thank you for that. We've seen lots and lots of people on this call who are not current members of the Commissioned Officers Association. We welcome you. We chose to open this meeting to non-members as well. And we do urge and encourage you to please consider becoming members. Advocacy does take resources, and we can't do it without you. And your resource might be your dues, but it's also your voice. And we can't do this without multiple voices that are aligned to our legislative agenda. So more to come, but thank you, sir, for your partnership. I want to thank the Veterans Affairs Committee for putting this together, and for all of you that were able to spend this afternoon with us, and more to come. Thank you, sir. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Have a blessed holiday, everyone. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.